Before I talk about where things are at right now, after 28 days of the Israeli ferocious attack upon the people of Gaza, and after, I believe, the 72 hours of the agreed-upon ceasefire has been gone through, and so far nothing else has happened. Before going into any of that and what it meant for the people of Gaza and for the people of the world, let me just say that I think the main point I want to make here is that we should celebrate the steadfastness, the courage, the resistance of the Palestinian people. We can't count on Israel to honor the ceasefire. We know that. We can't count on the imperialists to broker any kind of good deal that the people of Palestine want. We can't count on any of that. But we can count on the effect that the Palestinian resistance has had on people all around the world and what it shows about where things are at right now in the struggle of humanity against oppression, which is a struggle in the end result against this capitalist imperialist system that seems so all-powerful, but where a group of people can stand up and fight back, not knowing if tomorrow they're going to be blasted out of existence by a bomb dropped on their home, not knowing if tomorrow they're going to have water or be able to communicate, have electricity, any of that. They have stood up, and that is what is so remarkable about what has happened. So, you all know, we've talked about it many times, the ferocity, the viciousness of this attack upon an urban population, mostly as civilians, and we can go over a little bit the details of what were the targets, the military targets that the Israelis hit. But let's first remember that this ceasefire came after the Israeli casualties, and compared to the huge number of deaths and wounded they've inflicted on the people of Gaza, the Israeli casualties may seem small by comparison, something like 56 soldiers killed, but that number spiked once they sent in ground troops into Gaza that had to actually be in combat with the fighters of the Palestinian people. That number spiked, and they lost some of their best trained troops in the process. That was one of the factors that had affected their willingness to a ceasefire and to the pullout of their troops. The other thing, of course, was that the worldwide condemnation of what Israel was doing was reaching into areas where it never had before. I mean, there were demonstrations, you've just seen pictures of them, and on every continent except Antarctica maybe, and who knows, maybe there were even people down there who, and some of those scientists may have been for the Palestinians. But it was all over the world, and they were big, and they were passionate, and they came from, of course, the people of Middle East extraction who have felt it immediately, whether they're from Palestine or not. And they also feel the anti-Arab and anti-Muslim sentiment that's been raging especially in the imperialist countries. But there were also many other people who were not Palestinians or Muslims who joined the demonstrations. There were black people, there were Asian people, there were Jewish people. There were, and of course, many white workers in this country and progressives of all kinds, and I think that was true too, like in London and many parts of the world. So finally, and this has never happened before, even the Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, who is no kind of any progressive person on anything, but he said that Israel's attacks on the UN facilities in Gaza, and these were buildings where people had gone, were told to go to where they would be safe from the bombings and the missiles. He said that their attacks, where these thousands of people were seeking shelters, were, in his words, outrageous, unacceptable, and unjustifiable. Now, this kind of language you won't see in the New York Times, in their editorials, where they try to equate, you know, one side with the other at best, and at worst, they're, you know, just gung-ho for Israel. You won't see it in the U.S. Congress, which passed a resolution supporting Israel, by the way, in the Senate. 100 senators, including the so-called socialist Bernie Sanders, voted for that resolution. You won't see this kind of language. But what had happened, there had been a meeting of the UN Human Rights Council where the U.S. was the only country to vote against a resolution calling for an investigation of Israel's war crimes in Gaza. That had happened. So, you know, there was a lot happening to show that despite everything, the media, the imperialist media, the pronouncements of the politicians, you know, the role of Kerry, the role of Obama, it could not wipe out from public discourse the fact that there was a huge sentiment against Israel's crimes. The Latin American countries, the ones that have, you know, brought in progressive governments that know full well what the struggle against colonialism is all about, formed a group, I think 7 or more countries, and pledged their support for the Palestinians and for Gaza, and offered, you know, to provide medical, any kind of assistance that was possible.
Venezuela did.
Venezuela did that, yeah, and maybe others too. So, and even this you know, decision to go for a ceasefire came even after the war had even spilled over into the heartland of the Israeli state itself. For example, and you won't read this in the U.S. press. I found this, I think, in reading The Guardian or something like that. But there was fighting that was going on in Jerusalem, in other on the West Bank. Somebody shot and killed an Israeli soldier in a tunnel. You know, just found him and shot him. I don't know if he was killed, but there were many instances where the police and the army, the so-called defense forces of Israel, killed Palestinians demonstrating in the other part of Israel, you know, they were killed for being protesters, you know. And there was a small but very vocal resistance from Jewish people who were against this, including young reservists who were refusing to go into the Israeli military. So in many ways you could say that this had become a movement around the world, not organized from the top down, but coming from the bottom up, of support for the Palestinians. So what does U.S. imperialism want to do now? You know, right after, I think it was after the school was bombed, the UN school was bombed, and all these children were killed, the U.S. renewed its arms they sent like an emergency shipment of weapons and ammunition to Israel. So they can't, you know, they can't hide the fact that they're behind this. But now they're trying to make it look like they're trying to broker some sort of an agreement that would be favorable to both sides. So they're trying to deny the Palestinian people the fruit of their courage and their steadfastness through diplomatic measures now, at this moment. I'm not saying that it couldn't turn back to actual military assault again, but at this point it's probably difficult for them to contemplate that. So you have these discussions now that are going on between representatives of Israel and Hamas in Cairo. And they were set up under the aegis of Secretary of State John Kerry. And he worked it out so that General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi would play the role of the host for this delegation. Now, you know who General el-Sisi is, right? He's the dictator of Egypt. They had a phony election a while back to give him a cover, but his army just murdered people from the elected government, which was the Muslim Brotherhood government, which wasn't popular with everybody because they were pretty heavy on being, for a religious state. But they did not carry out any draconian measures, the Brotherhood. But this group, which are really the inheritors of the old Mubarak military dictatorship, they shot hundreds of unarmed demonstrators in the streets when they first took over, when the supporters of the Brotherhood were still, protesting what had happened. They just mowed them down. And at the time, did the U.S. say anything? Did they go, tusk, tusk, tusk? I don't even know if they did that. They just said, well, we might think about suspending our aid, but they never did. They never did it. So now Kerry is there trying to build up el-Sisi as the host for these meetings. So what Israel could not achieve through death and destruction, the Israeli rulers and the U.S. are now trying to get an advantage through diplomacy. However, we should remember that the leaders of the struggle in Gaza, and that's Hamas, elected by the people there, they have a lot of experience in dealing with not only an armed struggle against their oppressors, but in dealing with negotiations. They have a lot of experience. So hopefully they will be able to withstand the kind of political back-dealing and everything that will be going on as well as they have done in defending the people of Gaza on the battleground. Now, what was Israel's objective in this massive assault that led to so many deaths? The reason they have given is a very narrow one, actually. Can't be the real reason. They say, well, it's to destroy the tunnels. And then Netanyahu can say, well, our mission is accomplished because we've more or less destroyed the tunnels. But why were there tunnels built there in the first place? It was because Israel had completely tried to cut Gaza off from the rest of the world and restrict everything and everyone going in and going out for years. I mean, this is one episode in a struggle that's been going on for years, and it's the third actual war, even though there's been rockets sent in by Israel and so on in between. But there have been 3 actual wars since 2008. This is the third one. And so he said that they had to destroy the tunnels in order to stop terrorist attacks on Israel. Okay, so they found these incredible tunnels, 45 feet deep under the ground, that did actually allow a few commando units to get into Israel and carry out some military actions. But, yes, right. But what about all the tunnels that don't go north to Israel, but go south into Egypt and have been used to supply the people with food, with medicine, with allowing people to go in and out. What about those tunnels? They don't talk about that. But those aren't tunnels for terrorist attacks. Those are tunnels for people's survival. And he makes a big deal. It's a kind of a contradiction, actually, in what Netanyahu and the Israeli, leaders are saying, and their apologists are saying. Those tunnels were used to bring cement, as among a lot of other things that the people of Gaza didn't have, into Gaza. And do you remember about a week ago, Netanyahu saying, yes, so they went and used the cement that was supposed to be for the people's houses to build these tunnels so that they could attack us. Well, isn't that like saying, oh, well, we're destroying the tunnels that are coming from Egypt? That's the tunnels we want to destroy, not just ones that go into Israel. Of course, the reason that the main reason they needed cement was that they haven't been allowed to bring in enough cement to rebuild all the houses and schools and everything since the last war. A lot of that was only partially rebuilt. So the objective of Israel, wasn't to destroy tunnels. So what was it? Well, you can see by the viciousness, the attacks on the children, in playgrounds, on the beach, on schools themselves, on people's homes. You can see that the objective was to try and break the will of the Palestinian people to resist. It was to expand their Zionist control over all the territory of Palestine, unchallenged, so that they could be able to dictate to the people in Gaza and to Palestinians any place in where the Israeli state controlled it, who could represent them, how they could live, how they could survive. And this is what they failed to do, but not for lack of trying. Just to give you a few little quotes here. The head of the UN Relief and Works Agency, that's called UNRWA, he said that 90% of UNRWA's premises were hit during the conflict, and that the UNRWA was asking for investigations to be carried out regarding the attacks on agency-run schools that had been sheltering displaced Gazans. So this is the demand now, coming from the Palestinians and from a lot of people around the world, that at least there be an investigation into what Israel did. Right? And did you see the latest news about how Netanyahu is making a direct message to the members of Congress in the United States to prevent any such investigation from taking place and any kind of condemnation? Yeah. It just shows you. He knows what this Congress is all about. You see a lot about the do-nothing Congress, right? Yeah, they do nothing except what the lobbyists tell them to do, and that they do. And the lobbyists are going to be telling them, don't let anything go through this Congress that could be favorable to the Palestinian struggle. So they did as much damage not only to the people, but to their economy. They destroyed as many factories as they could. They destroyed the power plant. The hospitals and ambulances were targeted, and even the people who came to help the wounded and take them for medical care were shot down by snipers in the street. Nevertheless, the remarkable thing is the unity and the morale of the Gazans in the face of such an atrocious attack. And the thing is that the people of Gaza who have been fighting and taking the path of resistance, it's not that they don't know what a war is, that they have some illusions that it's easy. A lot of people born in this culture have the idea that war is sort of like a video game. But they know I mean, they've been through it for years. They have been suffering wartime conditions. And not just the attacks, but the blockade of Gaza. That's a war measure. A blockade is a war measure. And then that periodically would be reinforced every few years by more military attacks from Israel. Now, at this point, the far right in Israel, and I don't know, if you can distinguish them, but there's a far right that are actually criticizing Netanyahu because they're saying he didn't do enough to crush Gaza. These are colonial settlers with a fascist-like mentality, just like the Boers of South Africa. Right. They come in, they want to kill and displace all the Palestinians so they can have complete control of the land that they have stolen from the Palestinians who were living there. And it enrages them that the Palestinians have the will and the means to resist this. But what makes these settlers so arrogant? Because after all, Israel is a small country. However, it has relied on imperialism, Western imperialism, and especially the U.S. imperialists, ever since its beginning, for military, for political and diplomatic support. It is U.S. power that has made the Israeli settlers so arrogant and so demanding. The imperialists set up what was a settler state called Israel in 1948 on the territory of the Palestinian people. And since then, many of the families, the Palestinian families that had lived in the more productive areas of Palestine, the ones where, there was agriculture, where there was water, where so on, they have been terrorized and they've been squeezed out, some to Gaza, which is largely desert, and many abroad into the diaspora. And I know on the demonstrations that we've been a part of, we've met with so many Palestinians who were forced to leave. However, and this is the critical thing, they have never given up their national identity or their determination to return to their homeland. For many years, the progressive movement, so-called, here and in other imperialist countries, didn't recognize the right of the Palestinian people. And we know that because we had to battle them again and again to include Palestinians in so many different coalitions and so on, or include the issue of Palestine. And usually until maybe 20 years or 30, 25 years ago, we would not be able to turn around these broader, so-called broader coalitions that existed. I remember, I think it was at the time of the '67 war, Comrade Sam Marcy, who was the founder and organizer of Workers' World Party, went personally to a meeting of what was called the Fifth Avenue Parade Committee, or it could have been another committee that was like the Fifth Avenue Parade Committee at that time. And he got up to speak, and they gavelled him down, and we were shouting for him to have the right to speak, and they wouldn't let him. And it was, the '67 war was going on, and they, no, we can't talk about that here. We can just talk about what's happening in Vietnam. And this was repeated again and again. It wasn't until 1981 when we organized the first national anti-war demonstration, and it was with a coalition that we built with a lot of different groups, and we had to struggle with them, that had a Palestinian speaker. It was in 1981. It was also, by the way, the first national anti-war demonstration that had a lesbian gay speaker, somebody for lesbian gay rights. At that time we said LGBT. No, we said LG. We just said lesbian gay, right? No, we've understood it more widely as the movement has pressed. And it was the first to have a native speaker from the native population in the United States. Before that time, none of these issues were represented in the so-called broad anti-war movement. But it has been the continued struggle of the Palestinian people in Palestine and abroad through things like the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement, the trips to Gaza, the Mavi Marmara ship that was to try to break the blockade. All these struggles have brought about, in many ways, a sea change, so that today, if you look through cyberspace, you will find denunciations of Israel and its lies on what is happening, and of the U.S. role in trying to cover it all up. And it's not just a one-way situation, the way we regard the Palestinian struggle. It's not just that the Palestinians are asking for sympathy for their situation. No, they are giving something to the world movement. They're giving something that they're giving their lives, but their struggle has helped to raise the level of the world struggle against the crimes of imperialism. They've shown that it is possible to carry out a long, long struggle and not give up hope. They've shown that it's possible to confront a colossus, because Israel, thanks to U.S. imperialism, is not just a little country. It is a military colossus in the Middle East. It is. But it is one with feet of clay when it comes to the role of the masses in changing history.
That's right. That's right.
And I want to say just a little something about the movement in the United States, because, there's many, many issues, and we don't have a united movement, but we have many, many different movements that kind of collaborate together at times, but don't move together most of the time. And one of the things that gets raised a lot by people who are conscious is how dangerous U.S. imperialism has become and how much power it has. And it can, it can read your email, it can listen to every phone conversation, it can bug any room, it can, it almost like it knows what your fillings are made out of in your teeth, And so there's a climate of fear, as well as a climate of needing to fight. There's a climate of fear. Well, can't we, how can we do yes, you're talking about revolution. Revolution, my God, how can we do, how is that possible? And yet, with another part of them, they know without revolutionary change, top to bottom, human society will go down the tubes. I mean, we face so many problems. Look at what's happening to the poor people of Toledo. That they couldn't even drink the water because of the fact that all the agricultural runoff has caused this toxic bloom. And, I mean, there's all the ecological problems. There's the tremendous problem of climate change. There's all of this on top of the fact that, they can't, there's a gridlock in Congress, nothing progressive can get passed there, the attempt to do something good about the medical coverage, which is about the only thing that the Obama administration can point to, is riddled with all kinds of holes and so on. So, obviously something very different has to be done to change all of this. But how do you go up against such a monster? And I want to quote from someone who I don't usually quote from, and that's Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, he was a leader of U.S. imperialism, and he took the U.S. into the second huge inter-imperialist war, right? Which is generally a war to dominate the world for for monopoly capitalism, one particular grouping of monopoly capitalism. And he said a very famous thing that gets repeated a lot. He said, the only thing to fear is fear itself.
Yeah.
Now, why did he say that? Well, he said that because there was a big depression going on, and people had money, didn't want to invest it because they thought they wouldn't make any more money. And he was saying, no, 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 you know, you're strangling the economy because of your fear. The only thing to fear is your fear. Go ahead, build up the economy. That was the motivation for it. But I want to say it for another reason, and that is that the Palestinians would have every reason to be afraid, but they're not afraid. They're not afraid, and they're right up against it. And we can't be afraid either. And we have to fight on all these issues, and we have to fight against the, the corporate state's repressive apparatus. But it isn't just just their, use of electronic eavesdropping. It's what they did, what they've been doing to the young kids who are in Rikers Island. Yeah. Beating the crap out of them, for just being young and not bowing down before the guards. It's for all the reasons, we just cannot let fear determine our political struggle. And that's what the Palestinians are doing. They are not letting fear rule them. They are helping to change the whole structure of society by what they're doing. Not a lot to be said, but I just want to talk about something that's related, you'll see, but it's personal to me. I went to Ireland in May, and I'd never been there before, but I always wanted to go because my father's family came from Ireland, and my grandfather was a painter who's quite famous, and he is the only Irish painter who painted the Irish people fighting back against Britain. And according to a book that was written. So I really wanted to see that. But while I was there, I was really interested to see that there's a strong feeling in Ireland against imperialist oppression. And I didn't know how strong it was until I went there. And I think that it's not just Ireland. There's been so much movement of populations in the most recent period from countries that have been oppressed by imperialism, and it's bringing about a re-education of the people who lived in countries that were the oppressor countries. And while I was there, there were the elections, the European elections, and I never saw this reported on the U.S. press, but in Ireland, Sinn Féin became there were local elections for what they call council seats. They got the biggest vote of all the parties. They doubled the vote they'd had before, and this was, and yeah, Sinn Féin is the party of the struggle for Irish freedom and to liberate the 6 counties that are still under British control, and in reality. And it wasn't just Sinn Féin. I mean, they didn't take votes from others on the left. Everybody on the left got more votes than they had before. The Communist Party, the Socialist Party, the People Before Profits Party, the Green Party, they all got bigger votes. But what did Sinn Féin, but it was the Sinn Féin one that was so exciting, because before the election, the Irish government, which is, collaborators, they had arrested Gerry Adams, the leader of Sinn Féin, 3 weeks before the election, and charged him with some bogus thing about a murder that had taken place, and then they had to release him. So I was asking people, do you think this has what effect did this have on the election, the arrest of Gerry Adams? And they all said, oh, people voted for Sinn Féin because they knew that this was an election, this was try to take votes away, so they voted for him. But what was the first thing that Sinn Féin did after this election? They called a demonstration in Dublin against racism, and specifically racism against Muslims. Yeah. Wow. So you see how struggles reinforce one another. And this struggle by the Palestinian people will reinforce the struggles of the oppressed everywhere, I'm sure of it.